I'm
Because
excited to talk about today's topic
yeah,
with
me
you.
too. Me too. This is
It's,
something we're talking
I
about.
have some differences for you, right? But
Do you?
on these questions, I have
Yeah.
a few differences. Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
we'll go into that. But yeah,
Okay.
but I'm pretty much in agreement generally. But there's a few things I think he anyway.
Yeah. Sweet. So the topic we're tackling is more than just heaven. It's afterlife in general, but this
Hmm.
week we're focusing more on heaven, specifically as we did on Easter Sunday. We're carrying that forward into this Sunday, and the concern I had going into this is how do you deal with people's preconceptions of something as sacred and closely held as an image of
Hmm.
heaven, without just losing them, because we're talking about people's loved ones and their highest hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
And so, how do you talk about what the Bible really says about heaven without destroying people's image of heaven that, helps them go to
Hmm.
sleep at night? And so how do you talk through heaven with people? How do you process it in your own mind when you have all these cultural conceptions of heaven that are usually like very spiritual and very sort of disengaged from creation? uh, how do you reconcile that and think through it when you read the Bible? When you read the Bible, what do you see there as pertains to heaven, compared to what people normally conceive of?
Hmm. So for me, when I first think of heaven, I think before I became a Christian, had what is called the Platonic idea of heaven in my mind. It's a non-physical space, and yet it somehow exists beyond, way beyond us, and there's some kind of interconnection between it and us, but physical world and it aren't really compatible. Like that was the kind of way that I understood it. And like dead people went there and waited with God or something.
Yeah.
And then, so it's more a kind of general, you know, schema of heaven. But I don't think I really, obviously at that point I wasn't a Christian. When I became a Christian, I still had that view. And it took me a while to really understand the Bible because the Bible's a complex text,
Yes.
thousands and thousands of years. And so I think the question is, what does the Bible say about heaven first?
Right.
Before like what we think about heaven, let's like ask what it says. And I think the Bible starts with ancient Near Eastern cultures that the Jewish people were in and their views of the afterlife. And then right up to when Jesus came and what we saw happening with Jesus. And I think what we see there are these kind of overlapping spheres
Hmm.
where there's the earthly sphere or heaven. So you can look up at the sky, it's heaven. And the Bible talks about that. The sky is heaven and uses the same word for another realm, which overlaps onto this, which involves these kinds of other gods or powers or principalities that are
Yeah.
active and fighting against God's power and his principality. And so you see this kind of war-like arena, if you like, that's overlapped into this world that
Right.
connects to human affairs. And then you have like God's another heaven, which is like God's dwelling place where his full glory is manifested and where the angels dwell with him. And so we're going to have these three that overlap on top of each other, but it's not like a hierarchy as if one is more important than the other, that they all interconnect and matter and kind of affect each other. So I
Yeah.
think personally, that's what the Bible ultimately ends up saying about what heaven as a concept is. But I think the other way of looking at it is that heaven is actually Jesus's presence. I think
Hmm.
this is a really good way of understanding heaven, that when you're saved, you're given access to the kingdom of heaven. Now, the reason that Gospel of Matthew uses the term kingdom of heaven is because it's aimed towards Jews, and Jews didn't want to use the name God, so they preferred saying heaven, kingdom of
Okay.
heaven. But kingdom of God and kingdom of heaven, same thing. The
Right.
idea is that God's presence is heaven, like God's personal presence. And so when we're saved, when we become a Christian, we are assured that we will forever be in that presence.
Right.
And so we need to understand that all those realms and all of that, that is ultimately about whether or not we have access through faith, through Jesus, to God's presence for eternity, or whether we'll be turned away from that presence because we
Hmm.
don't have Christ. And so when we're thinking about people out there who don't have Christ and we're worried about that and will they be able to get into heaven, we need to be careful not to just talk about a ticket into a place. We're talking about a person that we know. That's what heaven really is.
Huh.
That's the essence of heaven.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most crucial aspect. And so when we're talking about life after death, we're talking about a transformation of what we are now into a whole new creation that is fully infused with God's presence. And so we're waiting for that to happen in the resurrection. So the question comes, well, what happens to my non-believing friend or relative? And I think this is always one of the hardest questions for a Christian to answer. And I think for me, the way that I look at it is I know that God's mercy triumphs over judgment, but I know judgment's real.
Yeah.
And I know that Jesus wants to know people and is doing whatever he can without overriding their humanity to know them. And so I can trust him with those people, even if I don't ultimately have the assurance that they'll be with Christ in heaven, in his presence for eternity. So that's how I personally look at it.
Yeah. Well,
what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, no, I was just curious to sort of double back on that question, because I want to get a more specific answer about what you imagine heaven will be like. What will existence be like in heaven? Is really what I want to know today. When you read the scriptures and you reflect on them and you consider eternity, what do you think existence in heaven will be like?
So I think existence in heaven will be an even more intensely amazing version of what we currently inhabit.
Yeah.
So all the goods and amazing things we have now will be amplified. And it will be a physical place that is energized by Jesus's presence in a way that our current existence isn't exactly. There's some sense in which there will be no sun because the Lamb Jesus will be the sun. So literally imagine a world where God and every single human being and the whole physical kit will just be completely infused with God's life. That's how I think of heaven.
Yeah.
And a place where worship and song and pleasure and interconnection are just completely available, and where we're completely satisfied in every way, and there is no lack, there's just joy. And I think that for me is how I imagine heaven. But to give a little bit more of a bird's eye view, I think we need to look at Jesus, the resurrected man, Jesus.
Okay. Yeah.
I find it really fascinating. In John 20, we see Mary at the tomb after the resurrection, and it says, she says, "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, I have carried him away. Tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." I love this. And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." So we see there that Mary has Jesus right in front of her. And some people have said it's because Mary has tears in her eyes and she's
it was
not
dark
thinking
or
and
whatever,
she's emotionally perturbed by the whole event. I think that Jesus looks different.
Yeah.
I think there's something that is uncannily different. And yet when he speaks to her, suddenly she's able to recognize him.
Yeah.
So there's a discontinuity and a continuity between what the future state will be like. And so we see that in Jesus. And then we see also the same thing happening again, where John, the beloved disciple, in John 21:4, where they're all in the boat, the disciples at resurrection appearance. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. It was only when Jesus spoke that then John, the beloved disciple, who seemed to have this special kind of personal connection with Jesus, beloved, very deep connection, knew his person. And Jesus, is reported as loving John in some special way.
Yeah.
it's then that John recognizes Jesus. So we're going to look at each other and see each other and be like, is that David Bennett? And then I'm gonna be like, hey, and I'll be like, it's David Bennett, So like, there's some sense in which we're gonna be completely different and yet completely the same.
Yeah.
And Scripture holds us in that tension because it doesn't want us to overemphasize one on or the other.
And I think we almost make the mistake of making Jesus into sort of a ghost figure. Like, for that reason, like, it could be, I think, understood that he didn't have a physical person, a physical body, because he was passing through walls and doors, and he was, not physically understood. But Jesus was recognized by his, not just his spiritual affect, but his physical person. When he wanted to be, like the story from Luke, for example, like as soon as he wanted to be recognized, he was. It's a physical something, though, isn't it? It's not just a spiritual or emotional presence.
Exactly. I think there's a sense in which who we are before the resurrection isn't actually fully who we are. So we're known for the person we are right now, but that's actually not in ultimately who we are once we're a Christian. Who we are is a future person that we're being revealed as.
Yeah.
And so I think at the Emmaus Road kind of experience you're talking about in Luke, which I was going to bring up, Jesus eats with them. So there's a sense in which he's physical. This is not a ghost. And also Jesus walks through walls when he appears to the apostles. Jesus disappears into thin air in the Emmaus Road thing. Once he's revealed to them, he disappears.
Yeah.
So he seems to have these qualities that he showed miraculously before he was raised, like walking on water.
Yeah.
And yet they're more intensified. They're more, and we're going to become like that. So I think, I've talked to my professor NT Wright about these questions, and he would say, David, we're not going to glow like a light bulb in heaven. It's not this kind of immaterial space up there where we're just shining like cherubs.
Right.
And I agree to some degree. It's not. And I think heaven is always destined to come down to earth, not an earth to come up to heaven. It's not. Yeah. It's not that heaven is against earth. And I think so. There's no duality. I think that's really important. But I do think we're going to glow like light bulbs. I think we're going to have this once we're glorified. So it's not just that we're resurrected, which we see in these accounts, but then we're going to be glorified. So Jesus is raised up into the highest heavens with God.
Yeah.
At the Father, and his body suddenly becomes completely part of the divine life. I mean, I don't know how to conceive of these things. It kind of goes beyond me.
It's really tough, right?
But it's amazing because it's a marriage. It's union of heaven and earth coming together in Christ. And so whatever that happens to Jesus is going to happen to our humanity. Whatever happens to Jesus's humanity is going to happen to our humanity. I think that's just so exciting. Like when I think of heaven, I just get amazingly excited. And I think I can foretaste that reality in the church through the love of the community and into the world with others who are made in God's image. And that I can foretaste heaven now. So it's not meant to be just a reality that's out there. Heaven starts today. Like we know Christ's presence today, and we will actually be glorified, not just resurrected. And I think that's an important point that we also need to make about Jesus, is that he knocked Paul off a horse. Like there was so much glory poured out through Jesus that it knocked a murderer of Christians off his horse and made him like number one Christian in the church,
right.
Like, so, you can't get more powerful, more present, more beautiful than God's glory fully indwelling a person.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's our destiny. That's what heaven's really about, is God's full loving embrace of his creation and coming fully into it.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Me too. But I didn't used to love it until I had a more personal, I guess, encounter with the presence of God. And I think that's the tough one, because when we talk about heaven in this way, it can start to sound like we're saying heaven is an eternal, church service. And for people that have
Yeah.
experienced church in a negative way or just a boring, nonchalant way, I think it's hard for them to look forward to heaven at that point. What do you say to somebody that goes, I don't want to worship for eternity? That sounds boring.
I think I want to say I'm so sorry that the church hasn't realized how amazing its God is. I mean,
Yeah.
I think for me, like as someone who was outside the church, you know, people will know my story as an atheist, gay rights activist, anti-Christian, who then became a Christian and experienced this presence. I'd say come back again. I'd say you probably don't really know this God, because if you do, you will be like so full of joy, and you'll like have just the most incredible life-fulfilling presence. Like really, Christianity is about God's presence being with you, in you, through you.
Yeah.
It's not about a cultural institution ultimately. Like that will all be transformed.
Yeah.
That sometimes can get in the way
Right.
instead of serving. And so serving that presence, and as humans we struggle with that, you know.
Yeah.
And Paul struggled with that. He talked about the flesh, which is really that whole, what he means is there's this kind of thing in us right now that resists the presence of God. It doesn't like the presence of God. And believe you me, that can look like a church service. That is not what heaven's about, you know. And I think you only really understand what worship is in this whole heavenly reality when you are filled with the Holy Spirit and you taste the powers to come, and you know
You
this
experience
reality.
him for yourself.
Experience. Exactly. Yeah. And you can't make someone do that. And there's lots of people, you know, you think of John Wesley, he wasn't born again in that way until he was on a boat with the Moravians and had this awakening to the new, what he called the new faith. And he started to taste that presence for the first time, even though he was raised Christian. So there's always an invitation, is if you've been raised Christian, you know, to actually enter in more into what heaven actually is. Maybe you haven't been born from above, you don't know that, and you might want that today. And I think, you know, obviously, Eric, you're here to invite people into that heavenly reality on earth. So I mean, that's how I think of it. It's not anymore this space up there. It's a kind of dimension of existence that's overlaid onto this one that we are born into through faith in Jesus, and we become aware of that presence through faith in Jesus.
Wow, that's so good. And I think I don't want to say this as exclusively as it sounds, but until you have that experience with God in his presence, something like heaven is really difficult to conceive of. Giovanna says hi.
Hey, Giovanna. Speaking of heaven, no.
Speaking of heaven, here she is.
Speaking of heaven, hello. I'm good. How are you, Jim? It's so good to see you.
I'm good. Just here. I was going to crash this interview one way or another. So.
You got any questions about heaven for David?
No, just come back to Houston. This is the heaven that you need.
I'm coming back to Heavenly Houston. Your coffee is good. I'll give you that. No.
There you go.
I was impressed. Love you, GM.
I suddenly feel like a third wheel.
You know, okay. Eric, you just have to come out with us when you're
right. There you go. So on that note, actually, I do want to talk about relationships in heaven, and you know, people want to know about family and marriage in heaven, and if we're going to be us, if we're going to have bodies, and you know, our consciousness will be essentially the same. Like, will we not have those cherished relationships beyond this life into the next one? What do things like family and relationships and marriage look like to you?
Well, I love this particular scripture in Matthew where Jesus is speaking with the religious leaders that kind of struggled to believe that there was a resurrection at that time, the Sadducees. And there's this very interesting, and they start asking him questions about marriage and kind of sex and divorce. And he says, do you not know that you're going to become like the angels, and that people won't be given in marriage or marry any longer? And so you're going to become like the angels. I love Jesus because he doesn't give any qualification what that's going to be like. We just have to piece it together, you know. That's why we have theologians. No,
Right. I mean, don't you know? Don't you know that?
Yeah, I don't, like, hello, you know, I love it. It's a bit of chutzpah, you know. But
Right.
but fundamentally, what's going to happen in heaven is sex itself, both the body, like male and female, marriage, and how it's interconnected, and everything is going to be transformed into a different economy where it will become universal. So there'll be this kind of intimacy that's even more amazing than what you experience in the depths of marriage, and even more amazing than the friendships that you experience this side of heaven as well.
Yeah.
And somehow, like, there's going to be a greater capacity to love, because our bodies will become spiritual bodies. Now, that doesn't mean non-material bodies in the Bible.
Right.
In 1 Corinthians 15. It means a body that's 100% infused with God's life and spirit, his ruach breath.
Yeah.
It's like going to be fully like, and there's this song in Jewish communities, I have more ruach than you do. And it's kind of like this sassy song, you know. Like,
I love it.
You know, just think of like Gandalf the Grey versus Gandalf the White, you know, like, wow, you know, like, and, you know, we're going to have that 100% ruach, and we're going to have that 100% life within us of God. And so that capacity to relate will be so much greater. And so sex will take on some other form. But I don't think that means that maleness and femaleness will be erased.
Okay.
So hear me out. The reason I don't think that they're just going to disappear is because Jesus took on a human body that was male. And if he didn't take on a body that was male and was just some kind of androgynous figure, you know, then he wouldn't be assuming our humanity. It would be some other kind of strange humanity. But no, it's this humanity that is male and female. And so he takes that forward, and his body is a male body. And so if you're female, you're male, that's going to be taken forward, but it's going to be given a different meaning. And sex somehow will have ended, and yet something that sex points to will replace it.
It's like everything else, right? What we experience this as in this life it's a preview, it's a foretaste. It's something that will be fulfilled in the life to come, and it matters. It means something. It's here to teach us something, but it's not the end in and of itself. There's something better to come of it. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, yes, exactly. And I think even things like eating, like it says the lion will lay down with the lamb, and like they won't eat each other anymore. And like, will we eat? And this is where you get to this point with heaven where it's beyond what we can imagine.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You know, Paul says, eye has not seen and ear has not heard. And so we can kind of scratch a little bit in the Gospels and see these, like, you know, what Jesus
little
was
hints.
like.
Yeah.
But then we're also being held back from knowing. And I think this is what's so amazing for me as a gay man who's like still same-sex attracted. It's like in a very intimate way, I'm like brought into this whole question because I'm like, well, what's going to happen to my body and my desires?
Yeah.
And suddenly, like, there's this mystery that God has told me, like, you will receive whatever that amazing thing is if you follow my ways and you go my path. And so I love it because in some way I'm waiting for a present that I can't fully unwrap yet. It's like I might be able to like have a little peek in, but I ultimately don't know what it is.
And that's one of the gifts that you give the church, because we all should have that anticipation. We should have that sense of something coming, a gift we can't open yet. And so I love that. I love to hear that. It actually wakes me up a little bit to the reality of heaven. And I love it. Thank you. So the question of marriage remains. And I wonder if I run into Giovanna in heaven, will I still be married to her? If I see her with another man, will I get jealous? Like, how will that work in heaven?
Yeah. Well, look, I think here's a few things to help. One thing is that you don't even know who you are fully yet.
Yeah.
Let alone Geo, right?
Right.
And marriage is this kind of sign of the future. It's not the future. And so that any intimacy you're experiencing in your marriage is a sign of the future, but it isn't it. And I think, so when you see Geo, you'll know her as she is fully known by God. And right now you don't actually know her as she's fully known by God yet,
Yeah.
because she hasn't been fully revealed as she is in God's heart and mind. Like, it's still happening.
We've
Being
been
made.
together a lot lately, though.
Well, I feel like I know this person.
I feel like I know her pretty well.
And you do, and yet God knows her better than you,
Right.
which is the kind of little bit of the reorientation that we need to have with our spouses, right? Is this kind of like, well, they're ultimately gods, you know, even that though we are, we are one flesh. There's a kind of spiritual intimacy that you both have with God
that outshines all of it.
Yeah, and so that's what it all just lies on, is that you are going to be like intimately connected to Geo, but even more intimately connected than now.
Yeah.
And you're going to, whatever is of faith, hope, and love in your marriage will remain in your knowledge of each other in the future.
I love
but
that.
It's like you're focusing on something that's just not even as amazing as what's coming. So It's like, and what I love though is like, and I think it's important when you're celibate like me, that yes, there's going to be an intimate like specialness about what the earthly marriage you guys shared, and I don't think that's going to disappear. And yet there's going to be something even greater than it, that when you receive it, you'll be like, oh great, and that'll just fit into it. But you'll have that with everybody.
Exactly.
Not just Geo.
I was trying to explain to our kids that mommy and daddy will be more like a brother and sister in heaven than a husband and wife, and they were like, ew, gross, you're kissing your sister. But it's just, we don't have the language to conceive of this.
I don't even think brother and sister fully is enough. I don't know. And it gets to a point where I don't even know. But I do know at the same time something about heaven is revealed in marriage, and the depth of intimacy in it. So it's not against marriage, but it's like
it will dwarf it. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's just, and I think we think marriage was created and that heaven reflects marriage. It's the other way. It's that marriage was created and it reflects heaven.
Yeah.
It's the other. Yeah.
That's right. So I want to do something. I've taken up more time than I told you I would, but I know you're writing your thesis. Great. I want to do something really quick before I let you go. And this is going to make you insane because you're an academic and one-word answers are not your cup of tea.
I mean, you're like, tell me about heaven. I mean, it's like one of the most difficult things to talk about with words.
So I have a list of things that I think people want to know. Will this be in heaven or not? And so I'm going to say the thing. And the question is, will there be blank in heaven? And you have to say yes or no with no further explanation. All right,
okay, let's do it.
Okay, here we go.
All right. not yet, almost, Dr. Bennett.
Hopefully. Okay, here we go. David Bennett, will there be pets in heaven?
Yes.
Will there be sports in heaven?
Yes. Maybe sports that defy gravity.
Will there be diversity in heaven?
Yes.
Will there be sin in heaven?
No.
Will there be coffee in heaven?
Definitely.
Will there be tea in heaven?
Maybe, yes.
In English heaven. Will there be death in heaven?
No.
Will there be sex in heaven?
Will there be sex in heaven? No.
Okay, that was great because when I said, will there be sex in heaven, your face froze on my screen. And I didn't know if you were thinking or I think it was the internet, but it was a great response.
Well, the problem is are you talking about bodily sex as in our gender or whatever?
Will there be sexual intercourse in heaven? Yes or no?
Thank you, no.
Will there be entertainment in heaven?
Yes.
Will we get angels' wings in heaven?
No.
I love your restraint. You wanted to give a follow-up like paragraph to each answer, and you didn't. I appreciate you abiding by the rules.
I love how you set this up.
Oh, that's great. David, man, it's good to see your face, and it's even better to hear your laugh, and we miss you in Houston.
I miss you guys so much. You're a special community to me, and yeah, I'm praying for you, cheering you on, and I hope to be back very soon after the kind of pandemic passes.
Let's make that happen for sure.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, I love you, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
See you soon. Much love. Take
All
care.
right. All right. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.